Hey there, so for this episode of Education, I wanted to talk about something that quite a few of you have asked me questions on in relation to the long-term consequences of having an eating disorder, and that's about vitamin B9 and vitamin B12. And like I talked to you about in the episode about thiamine or vitamin B1, there is a lot more to it than meets the eye. Um, so what are these vitamins and what do they do? So for this, I've got a little board, I've got a little whiteboard that I'm going to use, if I can open it, because a lot of you said that you liked being able to see things on a picture. So yeah, so vitamin B9 is also called folate. I know quite a lot of you might have heard about it in terms of pregnancy, and trying to keep up your vitamin B9 levels so that your child doesn't develop things like spina bifida. So vitamin B9 that comes from that can come from a whole host of things. It comes from vegetables, it comes from beans, it comes from obviously fortified foods, even energy drinks. You can find it in so many places, and a lot of people take supplements for it. Vitamin B12, on the other hand, it's a lot more difficult to get, and that's because it's only really found in meat. And this is why a lot of people who are vegan can develop vitamin B12 deficiencies because they're just not getting any vitamin B12. So I'll start with vitamin B12 because that's the more interesting one. Vitamin B12 is it's obviously taken up in the diet, and it goes through a really strange absorption pathway. So in the stomach, it binds with something called intrinsic factor, which is produced by something called your parietal cells in the stomach itself. And that intrinsic factor binds with vitamin B12, and it passes through your stomach, passes through your duodenum, into your jejunum, which is part of your small intestines, all the way around into your ileum, which is the latter part of your small intestines, right to the end of the ileum, where intrinsic factor binds through a receptor on the it's called the terminal ileum mucosa, and from there B12 can be absorbed into those cells, where it then binds to something called transcobalamin 2, where it can then go to your tissues, and in the peripheral circulation it's bound to something called transcobalamin 1. So yeah, that's the crazy pathway of vitamin B12. And I mean, some of you may have heard of a condition called Pernicious Anemia, where it's an autoimmune condition where antibodies are produced against either intrinsic factor or the parietal cells that produce intrinsic factor. So it causes the parietal cells to essentially become destroyed, causing something called a gastritis, gast meaning your stomach, itis meaning inflammation, so inflammation of the stomach. And it causes loss of those cells, and they essentially convert into mucus-producing cells. And so it causes atrophy, meaning sort of loss of, and you stop producing intrinsic factor essentially. So these people can become massively vitamin B12 deficient because they're just not being able to absorb it, because only I think 1% of what you ingest is absorbed passively without the need for intrinsic factor. So yeah, that's the crazy pathway of vitamin B12. So vitamin B9 on the other hand is a lot less flashy, and it's just I don't know, I can't remember where it's absorbed, but it's absorbed a lot more easily. Okay, so I'll just draw out the pathway of how vitamin B9 and vitamin B12 relate to one another. So folate in the diet is a polyglutamate version of folate. Once in the gut, it gets converted into a monoglutamate version, so it can be absorbed, because digestion essentially means making big molecules into smaller ones so that they can be absorbed. In the blood, it travels around as something called methyl tetrahydrofolate, or THF as I've abbreviated, and then it goes into the cells like this. It then gets converted into tetrahydrofolate just on its own. So where does this methyl group go? Well, essentially, an amino acid called homocysteine gets converted into methionine by taking on that methyl group, and that's catalyzed by an enzyme, but it uses vitamin B12 as a cofactor, so that's where vitamin B12 comes in. Tetrahydrofolate then gets converted into something called methylene tetrahydrofolate, like that, okay? And then that gets converted into dihydrofolate, like that. And that step here is critical because that is the purpose of folate, if you want to think of it like that. That converts something called DUMP to DTMP. And DTMP is one of the building blocks of your DNA. DUMP isn't. And this is the only way that we can generate one of the building blocks of DNA. So folate is essential for DNA synthesis, i.e. it's important for cell division, it's important for, for so many things. So that's the purpose of folate, essentially. That then gets converted back into tetrahydrofolate, and then it just goes around in a circle like that. Dihydrofolate reductase, like that. So you've got a circle going on. So basically, once you've got vitamin B9 in there, you can start generating this circuit. However, if you become deficient in vitamin B12, you're sort of okay. You've got enough stores of vitamin B12 to last you around 2 years, if you've got sufficient levels to begin with. However, there is a much shorter supply of vitamin B9. I said that this goes round and round in circles, but there is a degree of waste, and so some of that leaves the circle every now and then. So you've got less and less vitamin B9, and if you don't replenish that with stuff in the diet, that quickly trickles down to nothing. And I think to develop B9 deficiency, you only need to be deficient for about 6 months, so it's a lot less. And so I said, the essential purpose of these two vitamins is for DNA synthesis. And so what happens when you're deficient? Well, the main thing that happens when you're deficient is you develop something called a macrocytic, meaning macro meaning big, cytic meaning cell, so big cell, megaloblastic, mega meaning massive, blastic meaning blast, i.e. immature cell, anemia. So you don't have enough hemoglobin. So you develop a macrocytic megaloblastic anemia. And the megaloblast is one of the precursors of a red blood cell called an erythroblast. And that erythroblast is different from a normal red blood cell. So your red blood cell, you can sort of so that's looking at it straight, that's looking at it from the side. You've got this sort of disc cell, and that's got no nucleus whatsoever, because that's what happens as it matures. The erythroblast, I should be using the blue colour because that's essentially what it looks like down a microscope. Massive cell, I should really draw it even bigger, and it's got a big nucleus in there. And that's because you've got a delay in nuclear maturation, so it's not maturing to that, essentially. And so you've got a load of these in the blood. You've got fewer of these, which means that there's less hemoglobin, which is what is causing the anemia. And on top of that, if you're severely deficient in vitamin B12, you can develop something called a Pancytopenia. So your platelets go, your white blood cells go, essentially you're in trouble, you're in big trouble. And unlike vitamin B9 deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency is somewhat more severe because you can develop something called a polyneuropathy. Poly meaning many, neuropathy meaning a disease of the nerves. And that can take many forms. It can become motor, so you lose your motor control. I think it involves the legs before it involves the arms. You lose sensation. It's soft touch and your position sense first, but later on down the line you can lose all senses, and it can be pretty horrible. I've only seen one case of it, and that was in an alcoholic who just wasn't getting any vitamin B12, but I've heard that it is more common than they would like in cases of eating disorders, because they last for so many years, especially vitamin B12, because a lot of people with eating disorders just go vegan. as a way of coping. And so that sort of goes unmasked for about 2 years until they actually become deficient, and boom, they start developing all the anemia, the polyneuropathy, and all of that. So yeah, that's everything about vitamin B9 and B12. As I said, it's a lot more interesting than meets the eye. If you have any questions about that, just leave it in the comment section below. If there's anything that you want me to make in future videos, please let me know. I'm open to suggestions, because these videos are for you, they're not for me. Just let me know. So yeah, thanks for watching.